Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Devin Shanahan Show. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you guys had a good one. Thanksgiving was yesterday. I'm sure most of you celebrated it. And if you didn't, I hope you ate some food by yourself, ate some turkey, maybe did a little bit of celebration with your friends. Who knows? I know I had a good one. Ate a lot of good food, have a lot of leftovers to eat through the rest of the week, and maybe even more. Who knows? We kind of have too many leftovers in my family. But let's get straight to the news. Got a lot of things to talk about today. There's a lot of breaking stuff in the investigations about the election, and there's a lot of other stuff going on too, especially in light of the senatorial runoff in Georgia that will be next year, beginning of next year, either January or February. I gotta lock down that date. I'm not quite sure what the date is, but but it's relevant at this point. It's a little ways off, but yeah, let's jump in. Got an article here from the Daily Wire. Trump to visit Georgia, calls Ossoff a lightweight, Warnock probably a communist. So right off the bat here, before I jump into this article and actually start reading it, Warnock is a communist. He's actually admitted it before. He says some really radical, crazy, insane things, and it's quite clear that the Democratic Party did not vet him before they put him up, because now they're like, oh, and they're trying to kind of hide all this crazy Marxist stuff that he's been saying. And he said things along the lines of you can't be a Christian and be in the military, which is absolutely absurd because there are a lot of conservative Christians in the military. But who knows? He's definitely a communist. So Donald Trump's right on that one. But let's go on. Let's read it. President Donald Trump said he plans to hold a rally in Georgia early December on behalf of Senator David Perdue and Senator Kelly Loeffler, both of whom are running against Democratic challengers in a pair of January special elections. Trump teased his plans during brief remarks at the White House on Thursday, saying he would travel to Georgia on, quote, Saturday night and might even go twice because of the importance of the races. Trump called Democratic candidate John Ossoff, who is running against Perdue, a lightweight who doesn't deserve to be there, specifically invoking his failed 2017 House bid. So yeah, that was a really big House bid. I believe at the time when Ossoff was running, it was the most money ever put forward to a House race. The Democrats pumped millions of dollars, and he ended up losing, of course, because he's crazy, and there was a bunch of stuff about him. He kind of came out of nowhere. He's pretty much a trust fund baby, and that's why he was running, pretty much. And he's never done anything. He was I don't know, he was married to some lady who was studying to become a doctor, but himself, he had no accomplishments at all. He's pretty much just, like I said, he's a trust fund baby. But yeah, he lost that, failed House candidate, and now he's somehow running for Senate, and it looks like he's probably going to lose, but who knows? Well, take that back. I'll talk about it in a sec. Quote, the other one, said Trump in reference to Loeffler's opponent, Raphael Warnock, is either a communist or a socialist. I can't figure that one out yet, but he's either a communist or a socialist, probably a communist. This is not for Georgia. Trump's criticism of Warnock appears to be in part to reports about an event in 1995 in which a church where Warnock was a, quote, junior member of the staff hosted communist dictator Fidel Castro. Yeah, pretty much any time that Raphael Warnock has been asked about this church event, he pretty much just kind of sidesteps the question. He's unable to say that he's against Fidel Castro, which, I mean, if you're not able to say you're against Fidel Castro, read between the lines, people. That probably means you're a little bit friendly with Fidel Castro, or at least support some of the things that he is for, and he's an overt communist. So, I mean, yeah, so Raphael Warnock's a communist, guys. Let's be real. Read between the lines. But look, here's my opinion on these Georgia runoffs. I'm a little bit worried. I wasn't worried, a week or two ago, but I'm getting more worried as they get closer because, I mean, look at it this way. I'm worried that without Trump on the ticket, that the Republican down ballot is going to suffer. I mean, you saw the Republican House and Senate races were, I mean, the Republicans did awesome. They well exceeded their expectations going into the 2020 elections on November 3rd. And I mean, other than the presidency, which is still undecided at this point, but it looks like Donald Trump has to win 3 states, and it's practically an impossible mountain to climb at this point. But it is still undecided, factually speaking. But I mean, other than that, the Republicans won November 3rd. They, gained many seats in the House. They did not lose a single incumbency race in the House. And they held more seats in the Senate than they were expected to, especially if they can keep these 2 Georgia seats. It'll be 52-48. If they lose, it'll be 50-50. And as we know, a tie goes to the vice president. And it looks like that will be a radical socialist, Kamala Harris. As you know, her record in the Senate is more radical than Bernie Sanders himself. But yeah, I mean, I'm worried that with Trump not on the ballot, that there's going to be a lot of disgruntled Republicans out there, a lot of MAGA heads out there who are not going to come out and vote for Trump in Georgia because he's not on the ballot, and therefore Loeffler and Perdue aren't going to get these votes. I mean, Kelly Loeffler, she was involved in that like insider trading scandal a few years back. She was one of the big four names involved in that. It was like a year or two ago, I think, year and a half ago maybe. And then Perdue, I believe I could be wrong on this, fact check me, but I believe he's from like the Perdue chicken, like family, like elite family that's made tons of money forever. But the point I'm trying to make is these two, their records, they're rhinos, which is Republican in name only. They're not like MAGA types. They're not guys like Jim Jordan or Matt Gaetz who are kind of going against the grain and actually standing up for what they believe and what they ran on. These are typical Republicans who will say what they got to say to get elected and not necessarily push very hard once they're in power. They just want to keep their power, essentially. And, I'm worried about that. Now, to kind of play devil's advocate, the same could be said about, and the opposite of what I'm saying, the fact that Trump is not on the ballot, that means a lot of Democrats might not come out because, as we know, there was most Democrats, at least half of them probably, most of them came out because they hated Trump, not because they loved Biden. So, while I'm worried that a lot of MAGA people won't come out in Georgia because Trump's not on the ballot, same could be true for the opponent. A lot of Democrats might not come out in Georgia because Trump is not on the ballot. They don't have to vote against Trump. So, I mean, who knows? We'll see. We'll see what happens. But, I've seen some things on Twitter, some people saying that Democrats should, like some high-ranking people, some high-ranking Republican influencers, saying that essentially that Republicans in Georgia should boycott the vote, the senatorial vote, and not show up to vote because of the election fraud, and like essentially try to get like an audit to happen and boycott the vote unless an audit happens. That's insane, guys. Like, even if you do get an audit to happen, you're just going to lose the Senate races then. I mean, not showing up to vote is not fraud. They're not going to say, oh, okay, good job, guys. You got an audit to happen. Now we're going to redo the vote since you guys all stayed home like fools. No, that is a terrible idea. That's one of the worst ideas I've ever heard. And I've heard really bad ideas almost every day. I mean, I talk about the politics, so obviously I hear bad ideas every day. But, if you're in Georgia, listen to this. Get out and vote, obviously. Why would you not get out and vote? That's absolutely absurd. Let's go on. As some of you may have heard in the news, Michael Flynn has been pardoned, finally, by Donald Trump. This should have happened a long time ago. He was caught on a technicality, essentially. He was asked, it was pretty much perjury, I believe was the official charge, but it was essentially like some sort of, he was asked if he had ever talked to some guy who he had talked to, but he said no because the question was like worded in a weird way. I don't know the specifics, but he was caught on a technicality. There was this judge in the federal district court who tried to like lock him up even after he was essentially like set free. He was released from jail, and then this other judge like stepped in, this Democrat socialist, partisan judge stepped in and said, no, slammed the hammer down, threw him back in jail. And then he's been in jail ever since. And I mean, Donald Trump finally came through and pardoned him, obviously, because the election's over. He should have done it before the election, but I think that he just didn't want to like give the media something to run with prior to the election, because Michael Flynn was involved in the whole Russian collusion hoax, essentially. He was what started all of that. So, but he did nothing wrong. And Sidney Powell was his lawyer, so that's how she kind of, gained. She did pretty well for him, essentially, but that's how she kind of got involved in the whole Trump campaign stuff. But yeah, that's all we're going to talk about that. He's finally been pardoned. And, there's also a lot of talk about there about, there's a lot of people on both sides, including Tulsi Gabbard, who, as you know, is Democratic senator from Hawaii. Her and a lot of other, ranking influencers, individuals in the government are saying that Donald Trump should pardon Julian Assange. And who else is it? Someone else who's big. I'm not sure, but there's a few people who he's saying that he should pardon, and I don't know. I haven't read enough about the Julian Assange case to know if he should be pardoned. I do know that he did break federal laws because he did. A lot of people just give him documents and he releases them, but there's been some cases where he actually essentially coached whistleblowers on how to get information out of the federal government or out of these secure areas. And that is breaking a federal law. Now, I do believe in whistleblowing. I do believe that if, the government is essentially doing some sort of malpractice or something like that, or something harmful to the citizens of the country, or lying or going behind people's backs, I do believe in whistleblowing. But I also believe in the rule of law, and I believe that if Julian Assange broke the rule of law, no matter how stupid it may be, we have to stand by that, because as soon as we don't stand by our laws, essentially our civilized society falls apart. I mean, we're no different than monkeys at that point, but so we got to stand by that. And essentially, I mean, sorry, my lights just turned off there. There we go. If you don't, the case is essentially that Julian Assange broke the law, and I have a problem with that, but that means I have a problem with the law. I don't have a problem with what Julian Assange did, essentially. So, there's a lot of talk about him being pardoned, but we'll see. Part of me thinks that Donald Trump will, go haywire, declassify a bunch of stuff, maybe declassify like some Area 51 or some alien stuff, and then pardon Julian Assange, pardon all these people, release all these things, and kind of just go buck wild before he gets out of office. But who knows? We'll see. We'll see what happens here. But let's move on. Got an article here from the National File. Breaking. Trump says big tech immunities must be terminated for, quote, national security reasons. President Trump posted to Twitter late Thursday evening his call for the immediate termination of Section 230 of the Communications and Decency Act, declaring that the liability protections of big tech companies like Facebook and Twitter should be stripped for, quote, purposes of national security. Currently, big tech companies claim that they act as a neutral platform, meaning that they receive certain protections from what people post on their site under Section 230, which gives them a, quote, liability shield. However, given that they have engaged in the censorship of conservatives, they act more like a publisher, which is more liable for what is on their site. That is exactly correct. If you guys need any clarification on Section 230, I did a video a long time ago. It's called Section 230 Clarification. You can go over to my channel. You can subscribe. You can look at my recent videos, and you can find that. It's called Section 230 Clarification. It explains that Section 230 does not need removed. It doesn't. It doesn't need removed. It's written totally fine. The problem is that the Ninth Circuit Federal Court, which is California, Washington, Oregon, Arizona, Nevada, I believe, it's all those leftist states that, have a lot of democratic socialists, leftist Democrat-controlled states, essentially, and they've misinterpreted the law completely. And, I believe Clarence Thomas has said, yes, it has been misinterpreted, and as soon as we can get a case that is coming up through the federal circuit and get one in front of the Supreme Court, we will reinterpret this law correctly. And essentially what Section 230 says is that if you act like a publisher, you should be held liable. But if you don't act like a publisher at all, meaning you don't censor, you don't weight things and essentially recommend certain posts over other posts, like maybe you're recommending New York Times over the Daily Wire. If you don't do anything like that at all, you just have posts and they just go out there, then you're not able to be held liable. But if you do anything like that, you're considered a publisher, essentially. If you're manipulating the data or the posts or how they're seen and their visibility in any way, then you should be liable. But currently, because of the Ninth Circuit Federal Court, it's been interpreted that the social media companies are not liable no matter what they do. And they're obviously acting as publishers. I mean, they edited out the entire New York Post account for 16 days over an article that was 100% true about the Hunter Biden email. So, to say that they can't be held liable for that, or to say that they are not acting like a publisher when they are doing that, is absolutely absurd. I mean, you got to be super low IQ to believe that stuff. But let's go on. Got an article here from the NLQ report. Lieutenant General Tom McInerney said, quote, this is the start of a counter-offensive. Now, for those of you who do not know who Lieutenant General Tom McInerney is, he is the guy that essentially leaked the entire Hammer scorecard stuff. If you go back on my videos again, I have a video on Hammer and scorecard. Go back and watch that video if you don't know what it's about. It's very interesting. It really dives into it. He was the third highest ranking member in the Air Force. He served in Vietnam. He was a fighter pilot. He's done tons of stuff, worked at the Pentagon, very high level, very respected in the military community. And he essentially leaked the Hammer scorecard stuff and said, yes, the CIA has been using these things to manipulate low-level elections. And he believes that 2020 was the first time that they actually used it to change election results for the presidential election on a wide scale. Whether or not that's true, we'll see with some of Sidney Powell's lawsuits. But he is coming out and saying that this is the start of the counteroffensive, and he is referencing the Kraken that Sidney Powell's been talking about for a few days and was finally released, actually, yesterday. So let's read the article. The Kraken was released, two of them, actually, as Sidney Powell made public her lawsuits in Georgia and Michigan late yesterday. Things are starting to turn in President Trump's favor. I wouldn't go that far. Things aren't turning in President Trump's favor yet, but the articles have been published. The two mics were honest to be able to host Lieutenant General Tom McInerney, retired, on this Thanksgiving morning. General McInerney gave a concise and very specific update on the status of the Democrats' attempt to steal the election from Trump and loyal Americans. He noted in particular that the evidence presented by Mr. Giuliani and his team on Wednesday and the evidence contained in Sidney Powell's filing on the same day is nearly irrefutable. She noted in her Georgia lawsuit that 96,000 absentee ballots were not recorded and therefore must be thrown out. According to General McInerney, there was likely some involvement in all this by the Department of Defense, whose, quote, Kraken surveillance system helped determine that we, quote, have Chinese and Iranian involvement. Very, very startling. So, yeah, that is true. So, and I read both the lawsuits, the one that Sidney Powell filed in Michigan and the one that she filed in Georgia. And essentially what it alleges is that, well, first of all, if you guys remember in Atlanta, in Georgia, on election night, the voting stopped, or the vote counting completely stopped. And what they said is there had been a pipe leak. Well, Sidney Powell has direct evidence. She has a video of this supposed pipe leak, and there is no pipe leak at all. And they essentially kicked everyone out of the building, all the observers, and continued counting votes under the guise that there was a pipe leak and they had to shut down the building, which is completely not true. So that right there needs to be completely investigated, and there is evidence of that. She released that. Everything else is kind of speculative. And, that's okay at this point, because the way that lawsuits work is you propose that, hey, these things happen. We have a bunch of circumstantial evidence to show that these things probably happened or that we should investigate these things. And then the judge, if he is convinced by the circumstantial evidence, he will order the lawsuit to go into the discovery phase, which means you can issue legal subpoenas and you can force these various groups to turn over evidence. And that's exactly what these Sidney Powell lawsuits are attempting to do. They're attempting to enter the discovery phase so that they can have access to these Dominion voting machines. They can have access to these poll workers and these poll working stations, and they can essentially go through all this stuff and do a complete audit of all these things and to see what actually happened. So, I mean, there's a lot going on. It's really crazy, but I mean, we'll see what happens. Hopefully a judge in either Michigan or in Georgia, allows us to go into discovery. So we've got another article about it right here from the Gateway Pundit. Breaking, Kraken released. Attorney Sidney Powell files a 104-page bombshell complaint of massive fraud in Georgia election. And they also did it in Michigan. So, this article has a little bit of stuff here. Here we go. I'm going to read some of the highlights from it. Here on page 10 this is the one from Georgia. Additionally, incontrovertible evidence Board of Elections records demonstrates that at least 96,600 absentee ballots were requested and counted but were never recorded as being returned to the county boards by voter. Thus, at a minimum, 96,600 votes must be disregarded. And here's another one. On page 102, the claim states this. For these reasons, these are essentially the demands by the lawsuit. The plaintiff asks this court to enter a judgment in their favor and provide the following emergency relief. 1. An order directing Governor Kemp, Secretary Raffensperger, and the Georgia State Board of Elections to decertify the election results. 2. An order enjoining Governor Kemp from transmitting the currently certified results to the Electoral College. And 3. An order requiring Governor Kemp to transmit certified election results that state that President Donald Trump is the winner of the election. Those are very harsh demands. I really doubt that a judge is going to go straight to that. Now, what he might say is, we're going to have to hold off. We're going to have to, stop the certification, not allow the Electoral College to go and vote. We're going to have to reverse the certification, investigate this, do a full audit, and see who actually won, and then we can go forward with the certification. I would see that to be more likely. Here's more of the demands. 4, an immediate order to impound all voting machines and software in Georgia for expert inspection by the plaintiffs. That's essentially the discovery phase. 5, in order that no votes received or tabulated by machines that were not certified as required by federal and state law be counted. 6, a declaratory judgment declaring that Georgia's Secretary blah, 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 violates the Electors and Election Clause, U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 4. That's pretty much about, changing state law and go behind the state legislature's backs, which is unconstitutional. 7, a declaratory judgment declaring that Georgia's failed system of signature verification violates the Electors and Elections Clause by working a de facto abolition of the signature verification requirement. That was a big deal in Georgia. Essentially, what they said is signature matching doesn't have to be very accurate. We'll accept all these votes. 8, a declaratory judgment declaring that the current certified election results violates the due process clause. 9, a declaratory judgment declaring that mail-in and absentee ballot fraud must be remedied with a full manual recount or statistically valid sampling that properly verifies the signatures on absentee ballot envelopes and that invalidates the certified results if the recount or sampling analysis shows a sufficient number of ineligible absentee votes were counted. 10, an emergency declaratory judgment that voting machines be seized and impounded. 11, and a judgment declaring that absentee ballot fraud occurred in violation of constitutional rights, election laws, and under state law. 12, permanent injunction prohibiting the governor and secretary of state. Okay, this goes into, stopping the certified election results. 13, this one's interesting. Immediate production of 36 hours of security camera recordings of all rooms used in the voting process at State Farm Arena in Fulton County, Georgia from 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. until 6 p.m. on November 3rd. Plaintiffs further request the court grant such other relief as is just and proper, including but not limited to the cost of this action and the reasonable attorney fees and blah, 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 blah. So, this is interesting. There's a lot that has been claimed here. I think, essentially the rest of the so-called Kraken, these lawsuits, these filings, it was kind of a lot of speculation. It was a lot of, well, it's possible that this could happen, or isn't it suspicious that this has happened, or, we have this, government security expert here who says it's possible that China and Iran have hacked into these systems. There's not any hard proof. That's why this needs to go to discovery, because there's a lot of statistical anomalies. There are a lot of voting irregularities. There's tons of circumstantial evidence to show that there was election fraud on a wide scale, and possibly on enough of a scale to change the results of the election. But, what is more important than changing the results of the election is making sure that this never happens again. It's getting to the bottom of this, finding out what was going on, restoring transparency, getting rid of these flawed voting systems, if in fact they are flawed, and making sure that, people, both sides, the 71 million people who voted for Trump and the 80 million people who voted for Joe Biden against Donald Trump, making sure that all these people, every single American citizen, including the people who don't vote, have trust in the democratic process. That is critical. And if we do not combat this now and stop this now and get to the bottom of this now, it's only going to be harder as time goes on. It's only going to be harder. If we continue to let the Democratic Party run roughshod, go behind the state legislatures' backs, violate Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution. Like, it's just bad. It's a dirty road, Rudy Giuliani, who I think is kind of going a little bit off his rocker these days, but is still a very great man, very great prosecutor, and was a great governor of New York, especially during 9/11. He said it best. He said, "I know crooks, and if you give them an inch, they take a mile. If you give them a mile, they take your whole country." And it's true. We got to get to the bottom of this. We can't, we gave them an inch, and it looks like they took a mile. And we got to stop it before we give them the whole mile, because then they'll take the rest of the country. So, yeah, we got to stop it. Got to get to the bottom of this. We got to have transparency in the democratic process. Can't have half the country thinking that Joe Biden was elected unfairly or fraudulently. You can't have that. It will lead to civil war. It will lead to a complete polarization of the country. If we can't even get more polarized, it's incredible to believe that, but I think we can. It's going to lead to violence. It's going to lead to very bad things could happen, and we got to stop it now. Got to save our republic. Absolutely. It's gone. I got one more article for you guys from the Independent Sentinel. Lynn Wood's case in Georgia is back on. The 11th Circuit just granted Lynn Wood's appeal in Georgia challenging the validity of Georgia election procedure. The case was dismissed last week, but it has been reasserted. This is very good news. This means that something's going on here. Essentially what this means is that the judge that dismissed the case was probably a partisan hack. He was probably a Democratic partisan hack. And now we got a judge who, saw the facts and was not partisan and said, okay, let's move forward. Let's enter discovery phase. Let's get to the bottom of this. We have to restore transparency in the democratic process here. So even if there's no fraud, let's get to the bottom of it so that when we swear in a president on January 20th, we know exactly that president was elected properly and, it was a true election. There was no fraud. And, and good for the judge, good for the 11th Circuit who granted this appeal in Georgia, because we got to get to the bottom of this. Even if there was no fraud, even if everything is on the up and up, the appearance of fraud there is the appearance of fraud in a lot of these states. And we got to get to the bottom of it. We have to restore transparency. That is the number one thing. The number one thing is not changing the results of this election. It is restoring transparency and saving this republic before it gets any worse, whatsoever. So, yeah, I'll leave you guys to it. I hope you guys, have a good Friday, have a good weekend, sleep off some of that turkey you guys hopefully ate yesterday on Thanksgiving, and yeah, have a good one. Remember to like and subscribe. I'm on all the podcast providers if you like to listen. Maybe you don't want to watch on YouTube, but I'm on all the podcast providers too. So you can listen in the car. You can listen while you're doing, laundry, chores around the house, whatever you want to do. Yeah. But yeah, share it to your friends if you like what I'm saying. I think that, with the impending downfall of CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all the mainstream media, everything going to streaming, everything going to YouTube and podcasting, it's a good time for people like me. So, if you like what I'm saying, like and subscribe, share it with your friends. Thanks, everyone. Bye.